Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and Washington, D.C. is still reeling from the revelations out of those two IRS whistleblowers from the House Ways and Means Committee yesterday. Important stuff, but even more important is what gets done with it, maybe in other committees in the House, maybe in fact the Judiciary Committee. Joining us now is the chairman of that committee, man who may save this republic, Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Chairman.
You bet.
Well,
good to be with you, Larry.
when you saw, of course, when you saw these details, what stuck out to you here?
Yeah.
Because there's a hell of a lot of corroborating evidence here from some of the things you've been uncovering in your own investigations.
Yeah. No, I think two things stuck out. First, the U.S. Attorney in Delaware asked for special counsel status and was denied that by Joe Biden's Justice Department, Merrick Garland's Justice Department. Now, if this case doesn't warrant special counsel status, what the heck does? You're talking about the president's son, potentially the president himself involved in some of these forms. I mean, what the heck does? So that to me was huge. But I think they did it as you read Mr. Shapley, who is one of the whistleblowers. You read his opening statement when he was deposed. He talks. He tells in there that they needed to bring this case in three locations in Delaware, D.C., and the Central District of California. And there you have Joe Biden appointed U.S. attorneys who pushed back on everything. So to me, it looks like they denied his special counsel status so they could say, oh, this is the Trump U.S. attorney in Delaware. Everything's fine. We're going to let him proceed. But they really didn't because they wouldn't give him that status.
Yeah.
Second is they kept information from the agents on the case. And this, to me, looks like a pattern because we just had John Durham testify this week. And John Durham told us about in 2016, there was intelligence that said this whole Russia-Trump narrative is straight from the Clinton campaign and it's all BS. Intelligence significant enough that Brennan goes and briefs President Obama, Vice President Biden, Attorney General Lynch, and Director Comey, puts it into a memo, gives it to Comey. Comey fails to share it with the FISA court, fails to share it with the lawyers preparing the FISA application, and most importantly, fails to share it with the agents on the case. And then when Durham interviewed one of those agents, showed him that referral memo, that agent, during his investigation, that agent gets up, he's upset, he walks out of the room with his lawyer, comes back in and says, why in the heck wasn't I given access, I'm paraphrasing, but given access to that information? This could have changed the whole investigation. Same thing happened here. They kept critical information from the agents on the case. So that is frightening because it confirms what most America knows, which is there's a double standard at the Justice Department.
Yeah, and including information with regard to that alleged $5 million bribe to Mr. Biden, but both Mr. Bidens, that would be a total of $10 million. According to these IRS whistleblowers, they said that they had emails that corroborated those exchanges and bank transfers around the same time. FBI never shared that information about the alleged bribe that they learned about from their credible source. Chairman Jordan, does this rise to the level of obstruction of justice yet?
It sure raises that question in a big, big way. And it also raises the question, like, why was Chris Wray and the FBI so reluctant to even first acknowledge that this because this is several things happening here. But why were they so reluctant to acknowledge there even existed this 1023 form? At first, they wouldn't say whether it exists or not. Then they said, no, well, it does, but you can't see it. Then, well, you can see it, but it's going to be redacted. Well, you can see it's going to be redacted, but only the chairman and the ranking member. Finally, they let the full committee see it on oversight. But why the reluctance there? Let us see the whole darn document. Let the country see the whole darn document. Only thing that should be redacted is the source's name. But no, they can't do it. And then when you couple that with all we've learned from Mr. Shapley and this other whistleblower, it's like, what the heck is going on here? I mean, Larry, 60% of the country thinks there's a double standard at the Justice Department. They think that because there is. And that is what's got to change. And that's our responsibility now in Congress, and that's what we're working on.
The roadblocks that you just laid out here, the roadblocks that appear to have come from Merrick Garland's Justice Department here in D.C., impeding Mr. Weiss's ability to fully investigate this and bring charges in L.A. and in D.C., does that, in your mind, contradict Attorney General Merrick Garland's sworn testimony that there would be no roadblocks, that Mr. Weiss can actually pursue this to his fullest power?
It sure seems like it does. And we actually wrote the Attorney General on this issue several weeks ago. And it was interesting how he played that, too, because we wrote to the Attorney General asking some key questions regarding Mr. Weiss and the status and the special counsel. And the response we got back came from Mr. Weiss, which I thought was strange because I've never seen that. It's like we wrote the Attorney General asking about how this, and he just, he has Weiss respond back to us. Again, I think it's to create this false impression that Weiss is fully in control and running this investigation, when everything the whistleblower says in their testimony indicates that was not the case.
The timing of this plea bargain, which I believe you would agree is less than impressive, what they finally got Mr. Biden, the younger Mr. Biden Hunter, to plead to earlier this week. The timing's quite extraordinary, considering it was just 2 days before all of these revelations came through properly through the Ways and Means Committee. What do you make of that?
I think it's curious. The timing was associated with the whistleblowers. The timing associated with Durham testifying, because his report was very damning of the way the FBI handled things and the Justice Department handled things. I think there's, in this town, there's typically not a whole lot of when things get released to the press. There's usually some thought, forethought to it, and some timing issues to it. So I think all that is interesting as well.
I think I recognize the importance of the separation of power here. You're in the legislative branch. You've got the executive branch who actually entered into this plea deal through the Justice Department. And then, of course, the judiciary branch. There's going to be a federal judge who's going to sign off on it. You don't want the legislative branch or the judicial branch to tell the executive branch how to go about their business. But do you think there's enough evidence now to maybe put a pause on this plea deal?
Well, the judge will evaluate that, and frankly, I think it's a real question for the judge now that he has this evidence.
Yeah. Now
that he has a key agent on the case saying what this whistleblower said, again, under oath in an interview. So I do think the judge should take that all into account.
Of course, the problem here, Chairman Jordan, is if a judge says, no, I don't accept this plea deal, then the attorneys could just walk away and say, okay, then there are no charges at all.
Well, they could, but again, I don't know that the country would tolerate that. For goodness sake, I think that, again, right now we have over 60% of the country who already understands there's a double standard, and then you see that. So I think this judge is going to give it a good hard look based on, again, what we've seen. I don't know the judge. I don't know when. I don't even know if it's happening what day. And frankly, we've even heard from Weiss. There's been sort of contradictory information. Like he said there's an ongoing investigation. Well, is it ongoing until there's actually a plea agreement entered and the judge rules on that? Or is he talking about something else? I don't know. That's one of the questions we're trying to get answered as well.
Meanwhile, your committee, the Judiciary Committee, it would be the forum to get a lot of those answers, but it would also be the forum, I believe, that could start impeachment proceedings on a lot of the players here. Have you entertained that yet? Have members of your committee proposed this to you?
Well, Congresswoman Boebert had a resolution that was referred to Homeland Security, and then secondarily referred to our committee dealing with impeachment of the president. But that all dealt with the border, the situation on the border, and just how chaotic that's become, and I think intentionally so by the ridiculous policies that this administration has put in place. But what I think needs to happen is that investigation needs to continue in the Homeland Security Committee on the border situation. Mr. Comer needs to continue his investigation in oversight relative to President Biden and his business transactions and the 150 suspicious activity reports and the 20 different companies and all this stuff. That needs to continue. He's looking to interview some key people, to post some key people as here in the next several weeks. So that needs to continue. And then we in the Judiciary Committee, we need to wait for those investigations to conclude and see the evidence that they've come together, along with what we're doing, looking at the Justice Department. And then we will make a decision as a conference. I mean, that's how this has to proceed. It's got to be done much different than the way the Democrats did. They didn't give any due process to President Trump. I was on the other side of the equation then, advocating for President Trump. And I've spent months, it seemed, weeks in the bunker in the basement of the Capitol when Schiff was doing these depositions and all. So we want to do it in the right way, constitutional way. But if the evidence is there, and it sure is starting to pile up, it seems to me, then we will make that decision and we'll move forward.
Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Congressman Jim Jordan from Ohio, thank you as always, sir, and I hope you have a good weekend. There's more to come here on O'Connor Tonight. Keep it here on Salem News Channel. We continue now our discussion about the revelations we learned from the IRS whistleblowers yesterday out of the Ways and Means Committee. I had to tell you, some of the most fervent reaction that I've seen in the last 24 hours comes from people who have worked in the Justice Department. You see, if you're a veteran of the Justice Department, you revere that institution. You love federal law and you love what the Department of Justice stands for. And after seeing what went on in this investigation into Hunter Biden and ultimately his father and his uncle, you're actually very angry because this is not your Justice Department. What has happened over there? Let's bring in one of those men, Hans von Spakovsky, a veteran of the Justice Department. Hans, am I overstating the case? Because it looks to me like this Justice Department has been completely warped.
I was just shocked by what I read in the transcripts of the IRS whistleblowers. I mean, I couldn't believe that these Justice Department lawyers were obstructing, interfering doing things like when the IRS agents wanted to get a search warrant, when they found out that Hunter Biden had a storage unit in Northern Virginia, the Justice Department lawyer actually called the lawyers for Hunter Biden and warned them about this, giving them the opportunity to clear that out. That, to me, is straight out unethical, and that particular lawyer, they ought to be fired, and ethics charges ought to be brought up against them by their state bar association. That's how bad it is.
And of course, Hans, for those of us who aren't veterans of the Justice Department, we're not even lawyers, but we hear that story, and we juxtapose it against, a pro-life activist who was praying in front of a Planned Parenthood clinic in Philadelphia, and his home is raided by armed FBI agents at the crack of dawn, when he was more than willing to surrender himself. They treat that guy with an armed raid, and here Hunter Biden, he gets a heads up so he can clear out his locker.
Yeah, and look, the IRS transcripts came out after I read the plea deal that he's agreeing to, and I couldn't believe that either. I mean, that is a sweetheart deal that has just astonished me. And of course, now we know that they had enough evidence to charge him with felonies under the IRS code. And, this plea deal is for supposedly not paying about $200,000 in federal taxes. And yet we now know they could have charged him with paying $2.2 million or not paying that much money that he should have. Again, why would they not do that? It's hard to come up with anything other than who he is and his politics.
Yeah, and does this predate Merrick Garland? Because a lot of people are saying that this is Merrick Garland, and I think that obviously he needs to answer for this. But a lot of this investigation started before Joe Biden was even president, and that's also disconcerting because that makes it sound systemic, institutional.
Well, in fact, it is. And one of the biggest problems with the Justice Department, and I actually wrote a book about this, is that the career ranks, and remember, the number of political appointees is relatively small. It's overwhelmingly career lawyers there. Those ranks are, I would estimate, 95% filled with ideological leftists, people who are friendly to and love Democrats, hate Republicans, and they bring that attitude into their jobs, and you can see it in so many of the things that they do and do wrong.
Is there a fix, Hans? Listen, I know there's some people who just want to, take a torch to the whole thing, tear down the FBI, tear down the Justice Department even. Those employees that you just cited, those aren't political appointees. They're there. It's pretty hard to fire them. How does one go about systematically repairing what needs to be repaired?
Boy, that would be extremely tough. I have to tell you, though, that one of the things that ought to be done, which would be a big task, is to completely reform, if not get rid of, the entire merit service protection system. Remember, that whole thing was put in the late 1800s. It has never gone into any kind of significant reforms. And I frankly think government employees should work under the very same rules as all of us in private industry, which is employees at will. The biggest difficulty of the Justice Department is actually firing and getting rid of bad lawyers, unethical, unprofessional lawyers. It's almost impossible.
Earlier this evening, we spoke with the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Jim Jordan. He was just as outraged as you appear to be, Hans, and he's beginning to assemble his committee members, his staffers, and they're going to begin their hearings for oversight. What do you suggest he look at first? What do you suggest he start doing?
Well, I think they need to bring in the individuals, the employees at the Justice Department who are mentioned in these IRS whistleblower complaints and transcripts, and start asking them very detailed questions. And I will tell you that if the Justice Department does not comply, isn't willing to supply these individuals so they can be cross-examined, the House needs to use its biggest power, which is the power of the purse, to start cutting the budgets of the specific offices at the Justice Department and, frankly, at the FBI, who are refusing to cooperate with them. That kind of actual budget cuts would finally get their attention.
You mentioned the FBI, and this was sort of lost in a lot of this, was the fact that there was corroboration in these whistleblowers' notes with regard to emails that Hunter Biden had engaged in with regard to payments from Ukraine. Right. These coincide almost perfectly with the allegations of a bribe to then Vice President Biden as well as Hunter Biden that the FBI sat on. They did not share this information. They didn't help these investors corroborate. That seems like obstruction of justice. And of course, the fact that the FBI had verified the legitimacy of that laptop in 2019 when they sat back quietly in the 2020 election when people were claiming that it was Russian disinformation. That is systemic rot in that institution as well, is it not, Hans?
It certainly is. And, one of the biggest issues here is Chris Wray still has not given any explanation of what, if anything, they did. It appears they didn't. Why haven't they done anything to investigate this bribery possibility, all the information about this? There's no explanation for what they have done about it, why they have failed to investigate it, to further corroborate the information. And that again is a sign of the corruption within the agency.
We can keep going on and on. I literally have a list here that looks like a laundry list of all of these items that are disconcerting. You mentioned the power of the purse in the House of Representatives. Right. They have another power, and that's impeachment. And I want to set aside for a moment Congresswoman Boebert's plan to impeach President Biden. But what about starting with the director of the FBI? What about starting with perhaps some of these U.S. attorneys, political appointees, or maybe with the Attorney General? Would that be an appropriate approach to take right now?
Potentially so. I mean, certainly, the one person I've looked at on the immigration side is Mayorkas. Mayorkas ought to be impeached. But with the kind of wrongdoing we're hearing about now, that is the ultimate authority Congress has over individuals in the executive branch who are breaking the law, not carrying out their duties to enforce the law, and engaging in other kind of misbehavior. And yeah, it is something they can and they should be seriously considering.
Are you concerned, Hans, when you see news cycles like this and you see revelations like this, and you also see the corruption on itself, the appearance of the corruption, I should say, and what appears to be incredibly corrupt behavior, that's bad enough. But then when you look at what people are calling the two tiers of justice, how things are overlooked over on this side and then prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law in an unprecedented way against people like Donald Trump over the classified documents on this side. Are you concerned about how the American people are affected by this? If we can't trust our judicial system, we're on the brink of anarchy.
Oh no, I agree. And this is one of the most dangerous developments, really, in recent history that I can see is the partisanship that has developed into our chief law enforcement agencies in the country, the FBI and the U.S. Justice Department, and that's the kind of thing that leads to the kind of behavior you see in third world countries and dictatorships. And that is really, really dangerous. We need the same kind of hearings that we had in the 70s. Remember the church committee hearings over the corruption in the FBI? We've got to have the same thing for the FBI and the Justice Department.
Yeah, but those hearings happened because the Democrats were just as much victims of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI as Republicans were. Here, Democrats benefit from the corruption and, well, business as usual. Hans von Spakovsky, Heritage Foundation, thanks for joining us. There's more to come on O'Connor tonight. Here at Salem News Channel, we have some go-to websites to stay up to speed on all the things that are going on in American politics and pop culture, other than, of course, our town hall media sites like Hot Air and Red State and Town Hall. We also like to go to the Federalist. They've been all over the Biden family scandals, and joining us right now is one of their most important bylines, David Harsanyi, the senior editor over at the Federalist. David, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Let's start with this WhatsApp message that we now know Hunter Biden sent to one of his contacts, one of the people who fed him millions of dollars from China. Take a look at what's in this text message here. He says, "I'm sitting here with my father." And then he starts talking like a mafia thug. You know, we want to resolve this now before it gets out of hand. Now means tonight. I'll make certain that between the man sitting next to me and every person he knows, that includes President Obama, and my ability to forever hold a grudge, you'll regret not following my direction. And he again reiterates he's sitting there with his father. I don't know, David, seems like a big deal.
Seems like something worth investigating, I think. Yeah, I mean, there are numerous occasions where he at least says that his dad's part of part of the business, right? He stops by at I think it was in LA, a hotel meeting. He obviously there's this message. So it seems to me that that's worth investigating. And my theory is, and obviously we don't know yet, I'm not going to jump to conclusions right now, but my working theory is that that the IRS and Justice Department, at least the Justice Department, according to the whistleblower who brought this forward, needed to slow walk this investigation because if you brought Hunter Biden in front of a lawyer, they would ask him, who is the big guy, or was your dad sitting next to you? And if he lied about it, that'd be easily debunked. And if he told the truth, that would be a big problem.
Yeah. And it seems like a U.S. attorney actually stepped in the way of these IRS agents, senior level IRS agents who are investigating this, from even asking those questions. In fact, you on social media yesterday pointed out another occurrence of that. Let's take a look at that tweet where you point out this part. FBI said, any times when he was in the office, did you hear Hunter Biden say that he was setting up a meeting with his dad with them while dad was still in the office? The respondent, Mr. Walker, said yes. And then the FBI agent just changes the subject. David, this has all the hallmarks of your classic Washington, D.C. scandal. There's crimes involved here. We know that because Hunter Biden is pleading guilty to crimes. You've got obstruction of justice, and you've now got to cover up. I mean, what am I missing? Why isn't this bigger?
Well, why isn't it bigger? Because it's about the Biden family, and
right.
Joe Biden's president, and he's a Democrat. That's why it's not bigger. Now, we don't even, perhaps there were felonies involved, but really you don't need there to be felonies. You don't even need there to be crimes for something to be corrupt. It is corrupt for the vice president to participate in this kind of shady money-making scheme that basically leverages his name to make millions of dollars, right? I don't know what it was, $2.2 million that they know of right now. Yeah. But I want to quickly say, we also have other evidence. We have people on the record that the New York Post had on the record saying that Joe Biden had participated in these deals as well. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence, but a lot of it. And it's kind of incredible how little, as you say, or intimated, how little curiosity there is from major media.
I mean, listen, I don't want to complain too much about it because people aren't stupid, and it actually helps our ratings. It helps other alternatives. It helps the Federalist because people know it's out there. They're finding the information. They're going to seek it out, even if they're not going to see it from mainstream outlets. But it does, by putting it in mainstream outlets, I think NBC was the only network yesterday to even talk about this. That does begin the momentum in terms of this town actually taking it seriously and having that feeding frenzy you often see amongst journalists and politicians.
Yeah, I mean, I have already seen a lot of the MSNBC types and so on basically framing it as some kind of conspiracy, that there is nothing really going on here, obviously, that it's completely legal. Some of them have the temerity to say that it just shows no one is above the law. But yeah. So, but yeah, I'm not sure. We'll see how it goes. I mean, I don't trust people as much. I know that people aren't stupid, but they might have a fatigue with this stuff. They might think it's a tit for tat, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I think there's a lot to mine here, and maybe there is, maybe it's over in the sense as far as a legal thing goes. I mean, maybe the House will have subpoenas and so on that people will just ignore. So I don't know how it's going to go, actually.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there may not be a DOJ action here, but it will be a political action, and that's up then to the House Republicans to actually make hay with it. I wonder, though, also how the Republican nominee for president might take this story and turn it to their political advantage. Donald Trump has a way of making this story, which is about Biden family corruption and corruption literally at the highest levels in the Oval Office, and he makes it about himself, about how he's a victim of a two-tier system of justice, which he is, But I think that then by making it about how he has been dealt with unfairly, it distracts from these very real crimes here by the Biden family.
Yeah, you don't have to convince me of that. I think that's a real bad way to go about it, but that's how Donald Trump operates and always has. So for me, the problem here is I don't even like Donald Trump, but he is right. Is a two-tiered system of justice, and that's a huge problem for all Americans. It's a problem for the pro-life protester who has the DOJ coming after him, or the people who show up at school board meetings who the DOJ is going after them, which is much more important than Donald Trump. And Hunter Biden gets away with not just this, we should mention, but gun charges. Literally the kind of charges that Joe Biden himself in 2013 said we should go after harder, lying on a background check. So yeah, it's a two-tiered system of justice, and it should bother all Americans that the elite get away with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that is a great point. And I think, listen, I think President Trump actually is an incredibly gifted politician in his own right, especially despite winning the presidency, he's still kind of a novice at this game compared to his competitors. If he wants to make the case of the two tiers of justice in this country, which is a real issue, keep himself out of it. That everyone already knows what he's been through. But you're right. Focus on the pro-life protester who was arrested at 6 a.m. with FBI agents storming into his house. I don't see any FBI agents storming into Hunter Biden's locations. In fact, it looks like the Justice Department gave Hunter Biden's attorneys a heads up that his storage locker might end up getting raided.
Yeah, I mean, if this whistleblower is telling the truth, and I don't know for sure that he is, but I don't see any reason for him to want to lie about this stuff. And reading through those depositions or whatever, he has a lot of specifics, and he didn't seem like someone who's just making stuff up. But you have to investigate this stuff. I want to also go back just one thing about it's good for the Federalist, it's good for Salem, it's good for Town Hall that this happens, but those places and those outlets do not have the kind of money and the kind of reach that a lot of these bigger, that the New York Times could have if it was investigating this. Yeah. That's it's unfortunate, but it's just a fact, and that's the problem. In fact, they work to undermine the truth from coming out. They take leaks and frame things in different ways to make it seem innocuous. So they actually work with these. They have these huge budgets, and they actually work against people who are trying to figure out the truth for political reasons. We're obvious about our ideological outlooks, but that doesn't mean that the truth doesn't exist.
Yeah, you're right. They don't cover the story. They cover up the story in their own way. Exactly. One last issue here, and we only have a minute left, but it goes to the election interference, and I'm talking about those 51 members of the intelligence committee who interfered in the 2020 election. Turns out the FBI knew this laptop was authentic. They knew it wasn't Russian disinformation dating back to 2019. They kept their mouth shut during the 2020 election. What to make of that, and what are the repercussions? What can be done about it?
Well, they're corrupt, and it is likely that they knew that Hunter laptop a year before people were censoring that story, a year before a bunch of them signed that letter that Politico ran for them, saying that the laptop story had all the signs of Russian disinformation. Many of them almost surely knew that it was real, and that makes them incredibly corrupt. That makes them, I think, that they undermine that election more than Russian Facebook ads or anything everyone was getting hysterical about in 2016.
They chose the winner. They decided they were going to do whatever they could within their power to make sure that the American people went the way they wanted them to, and it appears they did. David Harsanyi, sobering stuff. We're used to that over with your work at the Federalist. Thanks for joining us. More to come on O'Connor Tonight. I got to admit something to you. Lately, I just can't get Paul Ryan's words out of my mind. Now, not his stirring and inspirational speech to the 2012 Republican convention. Remember, he was the vice presidential nominee back in 2012. He laid out his claim as the Gen X conservative leader we've all been waiting for. Yeah, I'll admit it. It was inspirational to have someone of my generation rise to a national ticket and finally transcend the disastrous boomers who'd been leading our country down a miserable path. That Paul Ryan was motivating. He finally spoke for the issues that mattered to me, and he promised to represent those values on a national stage while fighting for the principles that we of the Reagan youth in the 80s had come of age embracing with our full ideological might. Sadly, it seems that Paul Ryan is no longer in the room. Now, the words of Paul Ryan I'm now fixating over are from his appearance on CBS News last week, when he declared that some culture war issues are really beneath him and not worthy of his valuable attention.
Can I get your thoughts on that movement just quickly? I know we have to go, but Republican lawmakers around the country are pushing legislation when it comes to banning books. It could be trans rights. Call it anti-woke, or however you want to label it. Is that a good approach, a good strategy? You're a football fan. Is that the way you should approach it?
Yeah, I'm not a culture war guy. I think it's really polarizing. Look, on some of these issues, I'll side, with the anti-woke crowd. But to me, I'm worried about a debt crisis. I'm worried about, the future of our country and China. There are big policy problems that we need to tackle if we want to have a great 21st century for this country. My work at AEI Notre Dame and my Poverty Foundation is all about poverty and upward mobility. What I worry about are the big policy challenges that are going unresolved or made worse by Joe Biden. So that's why I want to win this election, so we can actually fix these big policy problems. Yeah. Cultural war politics is good primary election politics. It's very divisive, but it's effective politics. It's effective politics. I'll grant you that. But for me, I'm an old Jack Kemp guy. I believe in inclusive, aspirational politics. Solve problems. We got huge problems.
Yeah.
So we got a debt crisis coming. We got to get on top of that. Neither Biden or Trump are good on this issue. So both of these people.
Oh, shucks. It's good divisive politics, but it's good politics. You know what that means? If something's good politics, you know why it's good politics? Because people agree with you. And they're motivated to vote for you because you're standing up on those policies. That's what good politics means. Now, it should also be noted, and I'm sure you caught it, that the actual question posed to Mr. Ryan was about Republicans pushing legislation on banning books. And that was a great opportunity for Mr. Ryan to immediately expose that disgusting lie by explaining that no one is banning books. On the contrary, any book you want that Republicans have concerns about are readily available to you if you want to purchase them and make them available to your kids. They're probably available in the city or county library. This is about our schools' libraries. Republicans have judiciously determined that some books might not be age appropriate for school libraries. Like porn. Porn books that are being forced in the face of 10-year-olds. But no, Ryan let that slanderous lie go on, and he preened about how he's not that type of Republican. Those people. You see, Paul Ryan is the kind of Republican who isn't divisive. He works with his Poverty Foundation to lift people to upward mobility and to focus on the threat from China. He can't get his hands dirty in the culture wars. When Democrats said that Paul Ryan was going to push grandma over a cliff in a wheelchair, that must have really left a mark. And he's really making up for it now. It must be nice to live in Paul Ryan's world, right? Paul Ryan's world is a place where taxation, government spending, inflation are way more important than children being told they'd be happier if they would take chemical castrating puberty blockers to change their sex. Paul Ryan doesn't live in a world where pornographic manuals detailing homoerotic sex acts with vivid visual aids are introduced to his children at a tax-funded government school, but you and I do. Paul Ryan's world isn't a place where parents are investigated by the FBI as domestic terrorists if they raise their voice at a school board meeting, while they try to get their children back into a classroom after an unnecessary, devastating lockdown. Paul Ryan can't worry himself as a culture war guy because his 5-year-olds aren't forced to dance with a drag queen at his local library. Paul Ryan's world still has Toy Story or Beauty and the Beast movies for his kids, while your kids have Disney content celebrating same-sex marriage and gender non-binary characters. Over there in Paul Ryan's world, school counselors and educators don't keep secrets of the most intimate sexual nature with his 5th graders without the knowledge or consent of Mr. and Mrs. Ryan. Oh yeah, He doesn't have to worry about what undisclosed sexual tidbit his elementary school teacher has coaxed out of his little girl behind his back. How wonderful must it be in Paul Ryan's world, where he doesn't have to dirty his hands with those icky, mean-spirited, divisive culture war issues. How liberating to be Paul Ryan, spend his energies lifting people out of economic poverty, while the rest of us try to save our children from moral and cultural poverty. You see, Paul Ryan still lives in a world where even Democrats agreed there was a difference between men and women. Hell, Paul Ryan still lives in a world where Democrats would define what a woman is. Paul Ryan still lives in a world where even Democrats would agree that some topics should be off limits for our children. I wonder, does Mr. Ryan think we enjoy engaging in these topics? Does he think we relish the opportunity to petition our school board representatives about outright porn in our children's school library? Does he think we'd rather focus on preventing genital mutilation rather than fixing what he calls big policy problems? Does he think we all high-five each other when we learn about another child who's been secretly transitioned without a parent's knowledge because we've got a new issue that'll be great primary politics? What a shameless and despicable insult. No, Mr. Ryan, it's no fun over here in the culture wars. I envy your ability to dodge the draft and flee to Canada, or Manhattan, I suppose. We wish we could join you as a conscientious objector. But the fact is, we didn't start this culture war. We were secretly attacked on our own soil, and we were caught flat-footed and unprepared because high-minded, big-picture Republicans like you were surprised by the enemy, an enemy that was right under your nose all the time, an enemy that was plotting this war, that was plotting this secret attack, plotting it while you were looking at them, and you were ignoring it. You were looking the other way. You left us vulnerable. We were counting on you. We are in this culture war because you refused to acknowledge that the war drums were beating on our very shore. No, we didn't start the culture war. And we sure as hell would rather not be fighting it. We'd love to live in your world, Mr. Ryan, but we can't afford it. We're going to fight this culture war whether the Paul Ryans of the world approve or not. Because if not us, then who? Clearly not Paul Ryan. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight. You're watching the Salem News Channel.
And finally tonight, I keep getting told that America is becoming more liberal. No more than by people around my age, especially younger people. They keep telling me, you vote for Republicans? You're a conservative? What are you doing? You're such a dinosaur. Get with the times. Gay marriage is totally a thing now. If you want to say you're a girl, who cares? It's not your life. Is that actually true? I have always been fundamentally of the belief that America is, at a bare minimum, a center-right nation, that the Christian and spiritual values that we were instilled with in our founding do actually matter, and that they are, even though the left will try to deny it, an integral part of what makes us us. And as much as I think that there are signs that Americans are becoming more socially liberal on certain topics, I think that there's also this mentality that we need to go back to what made us good to avoid what is making us bad right now. Polling data seems to bear this out. Let's take a look at this Gallup polling right here. If you look at a couple of different issues, from 2022 to 2023, the amount of people who thought that a certain thing was moral or immoral has seemingly decreased. So if you look at this, birth control, down by 4 percentage points. Sex between unmarried men and women, down by 4 percentage points. The biggest one here is gay or lesbian relationships, which is down by a whopping 7 percentage points. All this at a time where the radical left seems to think that they have completely conquered the right on that issue. Gay marriage is the law of the land, and we're never going to see it go away. Now, we could have a disagreement over whether that's true, whether that's something that should happen at all. I am of the belief that marriage is between a man and a woman, but that's neither here nor there. One of the things that we keep hearing from the left, though, is that these issues don't affect the average American, and therefore that they shouldn't matter, that morality should not play into how our law and order is established. But that's ridiculous. Of course it does. If you look at the way American civilization has been behaving in the past few years, we started to see a decline in order. We have seen that men can run into the women's locker room, undress, and be told that if they are not accepted, it's the other people who are bigoted and not the women who are being exposed to a man's penis. We are told that the law and disorder in our American cities is a result of too harsh sentencing on criminals, that if we were just nicer, if we just had a more moral view of these Americans who are forced to commit crimes, well, we would have a better civilization. But that's just not the case. And now most people might try to argue, oh, this decline may be in the acceptance of gay marriage and the acceptance of all these things like premarital sex. This is just Republicans really doubling down on it, right? It's the dinosaurs like me who are pushing for this, and all of a sudden we're more willing to talk to pollsters about how we really feel. But let's take a look at this actual other poll in the demographics over total. So this is all Americans. This isn't just conservatives. This isn't just Republicans. This is Democrats. This is independents. And the views of same-sex relationships from 2001 to 2023, and again, not a recent phenomenon, has started to decline. If we go even deeper, let's get this next poll up here, it's even Democrats. Now, if you look at the graph, you see that Republicans have definitely led the charge on this, but even Democrats, the demographic you would most expect to be blindly accepting of LGBT relationships, has started to say that the morality of a same-sex relationship is on the decline. I think that there's something we should note here. That this is not just a one-off. This is not a phenomenon that is going to go away. Americans are beginning to realize that the moral underpinnings of this country were in fact the underpinnings, and that without some form of social and spiritual and moral grounding, the country collapses into hell. I don't think that this is particularly controversial to say. If you look outside your window, as somebody from Portland, Oregon, who used to do that relatively frequently, you see that there's no sense of order. It's all just chaos. And the radical left that would have you believe that we can just do this, that you can just have a civilization and just kind of flow with the flow, that's not realistic. There's one more piece of data that I'd like to show here, which is the acceptance of the death penalty as something that's moral. Let's take a look at this graph right here. It seems as if most people, Americans on all sides of the aisle, are accepting that the death penalty is sometimes necessary to maintain law and order. I think that that's the strongest point to make here. As much as the left would rather claim that the moral substructures and the idea of justice, the idea of accountability, the idea that morals matter is untrue, I think Americans are beginning to wake up to this. Because there is something that matters here. Morals matter. Justice matters. Accountability matters. These things made us who we are. And the fact is that if we don't have them, well, things collapse quite quickly. I've been Doug Blair for O'Connor Tonight, and we will see you next time.